Hey y'all, welcome to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Samantha Leighanne and I talk about books. Today I have another wrap up, and if you feel like you just saw a wrap up, it's because you did. My June wrap up went up extremely late because reasons. I just couldn't get my life together as far as editing, and I read 15 books, so it was a lot. This month I only read 8 books, and I usually have been doing blog style wrap ups, but I just haven't done that this time. So I have 8 books to talk to you about. 7 of those books were physical books. 1 of them was an audio book. I had 2 5-star books, 4 4-star books, and 2 3-star books. So pretty good month overall. Don't really have any complaints. So let's just jump right in and talk about the books. So the first book I'm going to talk about is The Fireman by Joe Hill, and I ended up giving this one 3 stars. First of all, this sucker is huge, but I blew through it pretty quickly. So basically this book is about a disease that makes people spontaneously burst into flame. It's not really much is known on how you contract the disease and that kind of thing. So you have groups of people that have the disease, groups of people that don't, and the people that don't, some of them form what they call cremation crews, which pretty much, walk around and go ahead and wipe these people out ahead of time. We find ourselves following our main character, whose name is Harper. She's pregnant and estranged from her husband, and she ends up actually finding a group of people who all are infected with this disease, and it kind of goes from there. I liked this book. I didn't love it. Honestly, it read a lot like an actual King book does, which, surprise, surprise, considering who it is. I do feel like it suffered a little bit in terms of pacing. It could have been shortened a great deal. One of the things that really is what took the stars off of it was there were so many pop culture references, and it really got on my nerves. There were a ton of Harry Potter references, which I know that sounds great, but it was something that really would grab me and take me out of the story whenever I read it. So, and I also feel like that means that this is not going to age well at all. I think that had it been done without those things, maybe it would have been a little bit more successful. And I really liked the concept of the disease, something that makes you burst into flame, and there's some other things that go along with it that I'm just not going to talk about because you can read the book for yourself. But I also like what this book had to say in terms of like group dynamics and groupthink and things like that. That was a really interesting piece of this. But overall, it was good. It wasn't great. I still love Joe Hill as an author, but this just wasn't his finest work. So next book that I read was The Ruins. This is by Scott Smith. This is a horror book following a group of college-age students that are on vacation in Mexico, and they get stuck at some ruins in Mexico, and things happen. I'm not going to talk about plot because you just need to go into this book knowing what I just told you, and that's it, because pretty much that's all I knew. This has been made into a movie. I have not seen it. So I didn't really know what to expect in terms of, like what exactly was going to happen with this book, and honestly I loved it. This is one of the best horror books that I have ever read personally, but I 5-starred this. I absolutely loved it. Like I said, I'm not going to say very much about plot, but it does deal with like survival instincts and really what that looks like and how people kind of devolve whenever they're put into a survival situation. I looked at my husband one night while I was reading this and I was like, these people are so stupid. Like, what are they actually doing right now? Why would you do these things? It's like when you're watching a movie and you're like, don't go into the old decrepit barn or whatever. Like, you felt that way whenever you were reading this book. And so for that, I hated all the characters, but I still loved the book because it wasn't about the character. Perfect summer horror read if that's something that you're into and something that you're looking for. I will warn you, there is a lot of gore. There were a couple of times like where I was reading it on my lunch break and I had to actually put it down and just be like, nope, I'm gonna come back to this later. Like, I can't, it's gross. It definitely is body horror, and I actually did say, oddly enough, in the horror TBR video that I posted, which if you haven't seen it, I'll link it up above for you, but I did say that I just can't with body horror. Like, the older that I get, the more that I hate it. However, I think what I can't deal with is humans torturing other humans. I think that that's, and like rape and that kind of thing, those are the things that I can't deal with, because this is very much body horror, but I thought that it was excellently done. So I ended up really liking it. But yeah, 5 stars. Loved this book. Highly, highly recommend if you are wanting more horror in your TBR. The next book that I read was Nightingale by Kristen Hanna, and I had put this on hold for my library for the audio forever ago because I had heard so many great things about it. Didn't really know much about it going into it. I just knew that everybody said that it was great and everybody said that it was gonna make me cry and that kind of thing. And honestly, I didn't go into this feeling like I was in the mood for it. I loved this book. It was so good. Absolutely excellent. It takes place during World War II in Nazi-occupied France. We follow 2 sisters. Both of them are dealing with the occupation and the war in 2 very different ways. One of these sisters is actually based off of a real person who took downed airmen and smuggled them to safety, and then the other sister resists in her own way. And it's told back and forth from each of their perspectives. I won't say much more than that simply because I didn't really know much going into it and I didn't really have a lot of expectations, and I think that's one of the reasons that I loved it so much. But like I said, absolutely 5 stars, and about like the last 30 minutes of the audio, I was sobbing. Like absolutely sobbing. It is beautifully written. The story itself is beautiful, and it was just like one gut punch after another towards the end, but it was in the best kind of way because while it was sad, it also spoke to the importance of love and the importance of doing the right thing, and like all of those messages together. It was just beautiful, and it was just so impactful. And so like I said, I sobbed the last 30 minutes, and it was just very intense. So forewarning, if you don't want to read anything that is like super emotional, then that's not going to be the book for you. But if you enjoy things like that, you know, it is historical fiction. I do love historical fiction. If you enjoy things like that, I highly recommend it. Next, I finished Rules of Magic. This is by Alice Hoffman. I ended up picking this up while I was listening to The Nightingale, and the reason that I did that was because I knew what was coming in The Nightingale and I knew how I was going to feel, and I was like, I needed to put it down because I couldn't spend my lunch break sobbing, or I couldn't sob while I was getting ready for work. So I just needed something to kind of like read in the meantime. So enter this book. This is actually the prequel to Practical Magic, which I read earlier this year, I'm pretty sure, and I didn't love it. The book is not as good as the movie, which I know is weird. This I actually enjoyed a good deal more than Practical Magic, and you do not need to read Practical Magic in order to read this, by the way. And overall, I really enjoyed it. I ended up giving it like 3.75. It wasn't quite 4 stars. I am not a huge fan of Alice Hoffman's writing style. However, I did enjoy the story so much whenever I was reading it, hence the higher rating. I feel like she does the more telling instead of showing. It's a very like lead you by the hand, like this happened and this happened and then this happened, and I wanted a little bit more from it than that. It's like she doesn't trust the reader, so that was the only thing that caused it to be rated a little bit more lowly, really. And if you like witchy stuff, like 100% read this. If I had to pick and tell you to read either Practical Magic or Rules of Magic, I would tell you to read this one because it's way better than its predecessor. Next up, I read My Best Friend's Exorcism. This is by Grady Hendrix. This is the same author who wrote the book Horror Store, which I read last month and really enjoyed, so I wanted to go ahead and jump on this. First of all, let me say I love the way that this book is published. Because it is actually set up like a yearbook. I really enjoyed that. This story follows 2 young girls. They are in high school. They're best friends. They come from very different worlds. It takes place in 1988, so full on 80s here. I was born in 89, so like I didn't grow up in the 80s, but you know, growing up in the 90s, pretty close together. I do love like 80s pop culture and stuff like that. But it takes place in Charleston, South Carolina. For those of you that don't know, I do live in South Carolina. Charleston is one of my favorite places in the world. We vacation there every year. I actually got married on Isle of Palm, which is one of the barrier islands off the coast, right across the connector from Mount Pleasant. And this book actually mostly takes place in Mount Pleasant. So it was really cool because they're going through and they're like, oh, well, this person's house was down Rifle Range Road. I drive that road every summer whenever we go, you know, take vacation there, and like talking about the connector, and one of the places that took place was actually Isle of Palms, and so I loved that aspect of it. I loved knowing in my head exactly where everything was. So that was really awesome. But it follows 2 girls, they're best friends, come from very different worlds. One of them gets possessed by the devil or by a demon or whatever, and things kind of go from there. Really fun. I feel like this could have been like an 80s horror flick. I really liked it overall. The only reason that this got 4 stars instead of 5 is because, yes, it takes place in the 80s. Yes, it takes place in the South, but there were a lot of like little bits and pieces that were either really racist or really misogynistic, and I didn't appreciate that. I feel like, yes, this does take place in the 80s. However, I do feel like you could have left those types of things out and your story would have been just as impactful. Like it wasn't needed, in my personal opinion. So with that being said, like that's really the only thing that I didn't like about it. But otherwise, I really loved it. This is it's a lot like Horror Store in the way that it's just really fun. There are a couple spots that are pretty gruesome, but overall it's not anything too overwhelming. It's not anything like, say, The Ruins or anything like that. So if you're new to horror or you just can't take a lot of like really gruesome stuff, then you should definitely pick this up. It's really fun, really quick read too. So next up, I finished the next book in my King Chronicles, which is Night Shift. And by the way, I know I am super behind on all of those videos, but I am finally caught up on like the notes taking and that kind of thing. So you will actually start to see those in your sub feed pretty soon. Anyway, next is Night Shift. I have 3 copies of this book. I have this, I believe, is like a UK edition. I'm pretty sure. Sorry, I'm trying to like keep the glare off of it because it's shiny. Pretty sure this is a UK edition. I have this book club edition. And then I also have my little paperback. This is actually what I read and annotated with and everything as well. So I am not going to say very much about this because this is part of the King Chronicles. This will get its own separate video. I ended up giving it an overall rating of 4 stars. There are a lot of hits and a couple misses within this book. One of the stories that I really like is we have Jerusalem's Lot, which was previously unpublished. It was published for the first time in this collection, and it's kind of like a precursor of Salem's Lot, the book, kind of giving us a little bit more like background and that kind of thing. And then there's also a second short story in this that's related to Salem's Lot as well, One for the Road, which takes place after Salem's Lot, and that one was, I believe, first published in a magazine in 1977. So there are a lot of other stories in this, a lot of stories that some of you might be pretty familiar with, especially because a lot of them have been adapted into screenplays or made for TV movies or, you know, like whatever, stuff like that. I'll go into the specifics of all of that whenever I actually do the single video on this, but this does have a lot of really great stories in it, and so I really liked it. Next up, we have The Tommyknockers, also by Stephen King. I have multiple editions of this one as well. I have 2 paperbacks and a hardcover. I actually read out of order from my King Chronicles. I ended up reading this with a friend of mine from Bookstagram, Cody's Bookshelf. Absolutely adore him, and I will link his Instagram down below for you to peruse. Huge King fan, so if you like King at all, I definitely recommend checking him out. But did a buddy read with a group of different people, and I decided I wanted to participate. This was a reread for me. This was one of the first books that I ever read by Stephen King, like in the first 10 or so, because the copy that I have upstairs is my mother's, and it's 3 stars. There are some things that I liked about it and some things that I didn't. In particular, I really enjoyed the character of Guard, and I really enjoyed the way that he writes about the town that it takes place in. I really love the life that he gives to the town as the town starts becoming. For those of you that don't know, this is kind of like, for those of you that aren't familiar with the plot synopsis, Bobby Anderson finds a piece of metal, trips over a piece of metal as she's walking through the woods one day, gets obsessed with it, starts to dig it up. We realize, oh shit, it's a spaceship, and things kind of go from there. So yes, it's an alien story, that is a thing, but I definitely feel like it's a little bloated, okay? I definitely feel like there were things that could have been left out. It just, I don't know, there were things that I liked and things that I didn't like. But once again, this is gonna be one that gets its own video, so I won't say much more than that. And the last book that I finished for the month was The Deep by Nick Cutter. This is the second book that I have read by him, and I believe that this was actually his second published work as well, his first being The Troop. I'm purposely saving that one for last. I did already read Little Heaven, and that one was just okay. I did enjoy this one a little bit more than Little Heaven, however, it only got 3 stars. I really liked this going into it. I really liked the beginning, you know, in the build-up. It actually is the story of some scientists who are going down into the Marianas Trench because they think that they have found a life form that is going to cure a disease that is currently ravaging the world. They call it the Gets, but basically, like, you start forgetting things, and at first it's just little things, and then eventually, like, you forget how to breathe, and then you're dead. So they're going into the trench trying to find the source of this life form to, you know, try and save the planet. One of the scientists that's down there has requested his brother to also come down there. His brother, who is a veterinarian and isn't a scientist and that kind of thing, and so things kind of go from there. Definitely a huge creep factor, seeing as this takes place under the ocean, and it gets really tense, especially when they're going down to the station at the bottom of the trench. So I enjoyed that part of it, but when we got to the end, things kind of started to devolve a little bit, and I found myself to be a little bit confused. And so I didn't end up enjoying it as much as I wanted to, solely based on the end. Fair warning, this is another book that has a lot of body horror in it, and there were, again, times that I actually had to stop because there were just some spots where I was like, this shit is gross, I cannot. So if that's not your thing, don't do it. Definitely more gruesome than Little Heaven in that respect. And from what I hear, The Troop is even worse. So not my favorite, but it wasn't terrible. It was just meh, if that is a good enough rating. So there's that. All right, so that is all I have for you guys today in my 8 books for July. Hopefully August will be just as good, if not a little bit better. If you guys have read any of these books or you wish to discuss, all of my social media links can be found in the down bar below. You can connect with me there. As always, if you like what you see and you want to see more, make sure you click thumbs up and hit subscribe if you have not already. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Bye.